He thought he was just passing through town to visit his parents' graves, until he saw two boys who looked exactly like him, standing next to the woman he once left behind. Andrew Miller hadn't set foot in his hometown for a decade. The last time he was there, he had stood in front of two fresh graves, his parents, with a heart full of grief and a mind consumed with ambition. Now at 35, he was the CEO of a global tech empire, a billionaire many times over, a man who had everything except roots. He arrived on a quiet Thursday morning, having touched down in his private jet just after sunrise. The air was different here, cleaner, colder, somehow older. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored city armor. Instead, he had thrown on a pale cashmere coat over a navy sweater and jeans, as if subconsciously trying to blend into the past. He rented a black SUV himself, declining his usual driver. This visit wasn't business. There were no meetings, no board presentations, no red carpets. He came alone, to feel something real. The roads hadn't changed. The old bakery still stood on the corner of Main and Elm, its windows foggy from the morning ovens. The faded mural on the side of the toy store still depicted children with 90s hairstyles chasing kites. Andrew's destination was the cemetery just outside of town. He hadn't visited his parents' graves since the funeral, too wrapped in the rise of his career, too afraid of what silence might say. As he drove slowly past the familiar streets, something caught the corner of his eye. A woman on a bench at a bus stop. Her hair was a golden blonde that caught the morning light, her features framed with a softness that pulled at him like a memory. He might have kept driving if not for the two boys standing next to her. They were 6, maybe 7, both in light blue sweatshirts and jeans. They weren't moving, just watching traffic, arms loosely at their sides as if waiting for something, or someone. But it wasn't their clothes or their stillness that gripped Andrew's chest with a sudden squeeze. It was their faces, brown eyes, strong brows, a jawline that mirrored his own. He had seen those exact eyes every day for 35 years. In the mirror, in childhood photos, in his father's portrait on his office wall. He braked hard, pulled to the side, and stared. The boys turned toward the sound of tires. The one on the left, slightly taller, tilted his head curiously. The woman looked up. Her face turned pale. Her mouth parted in disbelief. Andrew's heart thundered. Julia, his first love. The girl he'd planned a future with before ambition tore him from this town. They had lost touch after his move to New York. He had written letters at first, made a few late-night calls. Then his world became press tours and IPOs and market charts. He never forgot her, but he never imagined this. Andrew stepped out of the car slowly, not even sure what he was going to say. All he knew was that something irreversible had just happened, something that would change his life more than any billion-dollar merger ever could. The world around him seemed to blur as Andrew took careful steps toward the bus stop. His polished shoes crunched against the gravel, a sharp contrast to the softness of the air. Julia sat motionless, her spine stiff, her hands gripping the worn leather strap of her purse with white knuckles. The two boys stood close to her, now looking up at Andrew with a curious mixture of interest and caution. The taller one narrowed his eyes slightly, like he was trying to recognize something familiar in the stranger approaching them. Andrew stopped just a few feet away, afraid to get closer, afraid that this moment, this illusion, might shatter if he moved too fast. "Julia," he asked, his voice quieter than he intended, his breath catching in his throat. She blinked slowly, as if trying to wake up from a dream. Her lips trembled. "Andrew," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "I came back to visit my parents' graves," he replied. "I wasn't planning to see anyone. I didn't know." He trailed off, his eyes darting toward the boys. "Are they?" "Yes," she said before he could finish. She looked down at the twins, then back at him. "They're yours." Time stopped. The air left Andrew's lungs as if he'd been punched. He stared at the boys again, really stared. Their hair, a lighter shade of brown than his, fell in identical waves over their foreheads. Their eyes, deep brown and steady, reflected the same cautious intelligence he saw in his own childhood photos. It wasn't just resemblance, it was recognition. These were his children, his sons. He stepped back, needing air. Why didn't you tell me?" Julia's face twisted with pain. She stood up slowly, placing a gentle hand on each boy's shoulder. "I tried. I really did. But by the time I found out I was pregnant, you were already gone. You'd changed your number. Your assistant wouldn't take my calls. I wrote letters. So many letters. But I don't think they ever got to you. Andrew's mind was racing. Flashes of those early years in New York came back. He had been drowning in meetings, climbing corporate ladders, getting new phones every few months, surrounded by people whose job was to keep distractions away. Had he missed it? Had someone decided she wasn't important enough to reach him? I would have come back, he said, his voice cracking. I would have done anything. I had a right to know. I know, Julia said softly, but after a while, I stopped trying. It was just me and them, and somehow we were okay. The boy stood silently, watching the two adults struggle with invisible emotions. The younger twin tugged gently on Julia's sleeve. Mama, who is he? She knelt between them, her eyes brimming with tears. His name is Andrew. He's someone very special, someone I used to love. Andrew felt those words like a punch to the chest. Used to. He crouched down slowly so he could be eye level with them. Hi, he said, voice trembling. I'm Andrew. And I think I'm your dad. The boys didn't move. One of them looked at the other as if trying to process the information. Then the taller one took a step forward. Do you like dinosaurs? He asked. Andrew blinked. What? The boy shrugged. I like dinosaurs and race cars. A laugh bubbled out of Andrew, unplanned and full of disbelief. Yeah, I used to love both. Still do, actually. The other twin stepped forward too. Can you run fast? I don't know, Andrew smiled. I haven't had a race in a long time. Want to try me? Julia covered her mouth with one hand, trying not to sob. The moment was so pure, so surreal, so achingly simple. Her sons, her whole world, were meeting the man who had once broken her heart and unknowingly left a legacy behind. Andrew stood again and looked at her. I want to know them. I want to be part of their lives, Julia, if you'll let me. She nodded slowly, cautiously. Let's take it one step at a time. And so, there they were, standing on the side of a road near a worn bus stop. 3 lives connected by blood and 6 lost years. And one woman who had held it all together. For Andrew, the world would never be the same again. The next morning, Andrew awoke in the guest room of a quaint inn just outside town. The sheets smelled like lavender and old wood, and the sunrise bled softly through the pale curtains. He hadn't slept much. His mind had replayed the scene at the bus stop 1,000 times. Julia's face, the boys' voices, the moment one of them asked if he could run fast. Something inside him had cracked open, some long-abandoned chamber of the heart. He wasn't sure whether he felt grief, guilt, wonder, or all of them at once. He spent an hour staring at the ceiling before getting up and dressing without his usual formality. No tie, no tailored shirt, just a sweater and jeans. It felt more honest somehow. By 10, he was standing at Julia's front door with a small bag of pastries from the old bakery and 2 dinosaur-shaped toys he had found at a gas station on the way. He hesitated before knocking. There was still a knot in his stomach. What if the boys didn't want to see him? What if Julia had changed her mind overnight? What if yesterday had been a dream? The door opened before he could knock. Julia stood there in a cozy sweatshirt and leggings, her hair pulled into a loose ponytail. She didn't smile, but she didn't look angry either. She simply stepped aside and said, "They're in the living room." He walked in slowly. The house was warm, lived in, modest. There were crayon drawings taped to the fridge, tiny sneakers in the entryway, and the faint sound of a cartoon playing somewhere in the back. It wasn't anything like his penthouse apartment in New York, but it felt more alive than anything he'd owned in years. Alex and Chris were on the floor, one building a tower with blocks, the other flipping through a book upside down. They looked up when he entered. For a second, silence reigned. "I brought you something," Andrew said, kneeling and offering the small plastic dinosaurs. "They're not as cool as real ones." But the boys exchanged a look, then took the toys without hesitation. Chris turned his over in his hands, nodding in silent approval. "This one's a velociraptor," he said. "That's right," Andrew replied. "Fast and smart." "Like you?" Alex asked, tilting his head. Andrew laughed softly. "I used to be. Maybe I still am." Julia watched from the kitchen doorway, arms crossed but expression unreadable. The morning passed slowly. Andrew sat with them, helping them draw, answering every question they threw at him. Do you have a car? Do you live in a castle? Can you eat 3 pizzas? Do you know Iron Man? When Julia finally brought out grilled cheese sandwiches and soup, Andrew sat at the tiny table with them, knees crammed but heart full. Watching the two boys laugh and fight over carrot sticks made something ache inside him. A grief for all the years he had missed, and a quiet vow not to miss another moment. After lunch, Julia sat across from him on the back porch while the boys played in the yard. The trees were golden with the onset of fall, and the sun cast long shadows between the fences. They're good kids, Andrew said, sipping his tea. They are, Julia replied. Smart, sensitive, a handful sometimes. I wish I'd known, he said again, quieter this time. I wish I'd been there for the first steps, first words. I used to imagine what you'd say, she murmured. When they asked where their father was, I said he was far away, doing important things, but that he loved them, even if he didn't know them yet. Andrew swallowed hard. Did you really believe that? I had to, she said. For them, and maybe for me too. There was silence for a while, not tense, just full. Then she asked, why are you really here, Andrew? Cemetery or something else? He looked at her then, and all the facades he'd built over the years seemed to peel away. I came for closure, but I didn't know what I was closing until I saw you, until I saw them. Julia looked down, her fingers twisting the hem of her sleeve. You don't get to walk in and be their father overnight. I know, he said, but I want to earn it. Whatever that looks like. She glanced at him, finally meeting his gaze. There was pain there, but also hope. You'll have to show up, not just for a weekend, for real. I will, he said, whatever it takes. And as the sun sank lower, painting the yard in shades of gold, the two boys ran back onto the porch, one holding a leaf, the other with dirt smudged on his cheek. Dad, Alex said cautiously, testing the word like a foreign language. Want to help us build a fort? Andrew blinked. That one word, 3 letters, hit him like a tidal wave. He nodded, smiling despite the tears in his eyes. Yeah, let's build the biggest one ever. The following days were a blur of rediscovery, discomfort, and overwhelming emotion. Andrew found himself returning to Julia's modest home every morning, as if tethered by some invisible force. It wasn't just the boys that drew him back, although their presence had become an almost physical ache when he was away. It was the sensation of belonging, something he hadn't felt since he left this town. Each morning began the same way. Andrew would stop by the bakery on Main Street, the same one that had baked cinnamon rolls when he was 12 and getting over his first heartbreak. He'd pick out 2 chocolate croissants for the twins, a small pastry for Julia, and black coffee for himself. Then he'd arrive at the house just in time to find Alex and Chris still in their pajamas, groggy-eyed but excited. They would burst into wide grins when they saw him, a reaction that warmed him more than any corporate win ever had. Julia was wary at first. She didn't make things easy. And why should she? Andrew had vanished for 6 years of their lives. 7 if you counted the year before she gave birth, when he unknowingly left her behind. But even in her coolness, there was a quiet curiosity. She began to ask questions. What was his life really like? Why hadn't he looked back? Did he regret leaving? Andrew didn't sugarcoat his answers. I was selfish, he said one afternoon, while helping her fold laundry in the living room. I told myself I was chasing success for us, but somewhere along the way, I convinced myself love could wait, that you'd always be there. And when I wasn't, she asked quietly, folding a tiny Spider-Man t-shirt. I buried the guilt under work, he replied. I didn't even know I was bleeding until I saw you again. Julia didn't respond right away. She simply folded another shirt and set it on the stack. But her silence wasn't cold anymore. It was listening. Later that evening, after the twins were asleep and the dishes done, Andrew lingered in the kitchen. Julia was rinsing out mugs when he asked, Do they know anything about me before now? She paused. Only that you were far away and important. I never said you didn't care. I just didn't have the truth to give them. I want to change that, he said. Not overnight. I know I can't rewrite the past, but maybe I can help shape the future. Julia dried her hands on a dish towel. You're not a bedtime story, Andrew. You don't just show up, charm them for a week, and disappear again. I'm not going to disappear. We'll see. The next weekend, Andrew invited Julia and the boys to join him for a picnic at the park he used to go to as a kid. It was autumn in full bloom, the leaves a carnival of oranges and reds. They spread a blanket under a maple tree, unpacked sandwiches and juice boxes, and for the first time since his return, it felt like a family. Not the illusion of one, not the ghost of what might have been, something real. Andrew brought a kite, and the boys shrieked with laughter as they chased it across the open field. He ran with them, coat discarded, tie forgotten, his expensive shoes muddy and completely ignored. Julia sat on the blanket, laughing softly, one hand shielding her eyes from the sun. At one point, Chris tripped and scraped his knee. He tried to be brave, but the tears came anyway. Without thinking, Andrew scooped him up, sat down on the grass, and pulled him into his lap. "It's okay, buddy. You're strong. That just means you played really hard." Chris sniffled. "Are you going to go back to your big house?" Andrew glanced at Julia, then back at his son. "Maybe, but not without you guys." Chris leaned into him, tiny hands clutching his shirt. "Promise?" Andrew didn't hesitate. "Promise." That night, after dropping them off and walking back to the inn under the streetlights of the quiet town, Andrew realized something profound. He had built skyscrapers, led empires, and closed deals that shaped industries. But he had never felt this full, this human. He texted Julia before bed. "Thanks for today," she replied minutes later. "You did good, Andrew. They're starting to believe in you." "So am I." Andrew smiled at the screen longer than he should have. For the first time in years, he slept without dreaming of loss. He dreamed instead of home. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Andrew first saw Julia and the twins at the bus stop, and in that short time, his life had begun to shift in ways he never imagined. His phone still buzzed with emails from New York, still hummed with calls from investors, PR agents, and board members wanting updates on quarterly reports. But those messages were increasingly left unread, unanswered. His focus was no longer spreadsheets or shareholder meetings. His world had shrunk beautifully down to 2 boys who called him Dad with hesitant hope, and a woman who once held his entire future in her hands. Andrew extended his stay in the town without fanfare. He stopped telling himself it was temporary. Instead, he began taking small steps toward permanence. He rented a small house just a few streets away from Julia's. Not a mansion, not a showpiece, just a warm, sunlit space with a backyard and creaky floorboards. He had it furnished quickly, making sure the boys had a room of their own for weekend visits. He stocked the fridge with juice boxes, cartoon-shaped cereals, and jars of peanut butter. He even ordered bunk beds, despite not knowing if they'd want to stay overnight yet. He invited Julia and the boys for dinner the following Friday. He cooked himself, or tried to. When Julia and the twins arrived, they were met with a smoky kitchen, a nearly inedible lasagna, and Andrew, flustered and flour-covered, holding a wooden spoon like a weapon. Julia laughed for the first time in years, a real open laugh that filled the small dining room and made Andrew's shoulders relax. She took over the kitchen, guiding him like a seasoned general. The twins helped set the table, badly, and eventually they all ate together, huddled around mismatched chairs, passing overcooked pasta and laughing at Andrew's failed attempt to bake cookies. After dinner, Andrew and Julia sat on the back steps, wine glasses in hand, watching the boys chase fireflies in the backyard. The night was quiet except for their soft conversation. "I forgot how good it feels," Julia said, staring out into the dark. "What?" Andrew asked, taking a sip of wine. "This, all of it. Noise, laughter, being able to breathe." Andrew looked at her, the soft glow from the porch light catching the strands of hair that had fallen across her cheek. "I want to give you more of that," he said. "I want to earn a place in your life again." Julia didn't reply immediately. Her fingers toyed with the stem of the wine glass. "You walked away once. You didn't know I was pregnant, I get that. But you left me without looking back. I was young. I thought success would fill every hole I had inside me. I was wrong." "You say all the right things, Andrew," she said quietly, "but saying and staying are different." "I'm not leaving," he said firmly now. "Not this time." Later that week, something happened that neither of them expected. Julia got a call from the local elementary school. There was an opening in the fall kindergarten class for the twins, and they needed to know who would be listed as the legal guardian and emergency contact. Julia hesitated. Until now, she had handled everything. Doctor's visits, school forms, bedtime stories. The idea of sharing that with Andrew terrified her. She told him over coffee on a quiet Wednesday morning. I got a call from the school. They need official documents. He didn't answer right away, waiting for her to continue. I've always listed myself, only me, but they asked if there's a father involved. Andrew placed his coffee cup down gently. I'd be honored to be listed, but only if you're ready. Julia looked up, her blue eyes scanning his face for signs of doubt, of pretense, but there was none. She nodded slowly. Okay, let's do it together. Filling out those forms at the school the next day was a surprisingly emotional experience. When Andrew signed his name under father, something shifted inside him, something sacred. For the first time in his life, his signature didn't just represent power or control. It represented responsibility, love, presence. He watched as the twins ran down the hallway, hand in hand, unaware of the magnitude of what just happened. That night, Julia sent him a photo, one she had taken years ago. It was a picture of her sitting in a hospital bed, holding two newborn babies wrapped in blue. Her eyes were tired but radiant. You weren't there that day, she wrote beneath it. But maybe you were meant to arrive now, when they could remember you. Andrew stared at the photo for a long time, tears stinging his eyes. He placed a hand over his phone, as if trying to touch the past. He couldn't change what he missed. But every day, he was beginning to believe he could shape what came next, and the path forward, for once, didn't feel lonely. The first day of school arrived with the kind of nervous excitement Andrew hadn't felt since his own childhood. He was up before sunrise, standing in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie out of pure habit, before realizing that no tie was necessary. This wasn't a boardroom. This was more important. Julia had invited him to join them that morning. He showed up at her door with fresh bagels, juice boxes, and two small lunch boxes he had spent half the night preparing. Each had a note inside, one for Alex, one for Chris. They were simple. You've got this. Love, Dad. But they felt monumental. Inside the house, chaos reigned. Chris had lost one shoe. Alex couldn't find his favorite dinosaur backpack. Julia was trying to braid their hair, wipe toast crumbs off their cheeks, and calm their first day jitters all at once. Andrew, seeing her overwhelmed, stepped in without hesitation, finding the missing shoe under the couch, calming Alex by showing him a silly dinosaur impression, and helping zip up jackets. When they finally stepped outside, the morning air was crisp with the scent of freshly cut grass in early autumn. Julia and Andrew walked the boys hand in hand toward the school down the block. Other parents were doing the same. Some glanced at them, Andrew in particular. He looked a bit out of place in his neatly pressed shirt and polished shoes, but he didn't care. Outside the school gates, Alex suddenly clung to Andrew's leg. What if nobody likes us? He whispered. Andrew crouched down, steadying his son's chin with two fingers. They're going to love you. You're smart and funny and kind. And if anyone gives you a hard time, you come to me, okay? I'll always be here. Chris looked at Julia. Are you leaving? Not for long, she said with a soft smile. We'll be right here at pickup time. The boys hesitated for one more breath, then slowly let go and walked into the building. It felt like the whole world moved with them. Andrew and Julia stood there for a moment, watching through the glass doors as the two little backpacks bounced further down the hall. Then silence. I didn't think I'd cry, Julia said, laughing through tears. Andrew handed her a tissue. I didn't think I'd get the chance to. They walked back to her house in silence, occasionally brushing arms, their thoughts aligned but unspoken. Over coffee in the kitchen, Julia spoke first. I remember being in that hospital bed, she said, holding them, alone. I remember thinking, how the hell am I going to do this? You did, Andrew said. You more than did. Julia met his eyes. I don't want to do it alone anymore. He swallowed hard. You won't. In the days that followed, a new rhythm began to form between them. It wasn't perfect. There were disagreements, small ones about bedtime routines, screen time, how much sugar the boys could have. But there was also laughter. Dinners that ended in board games, Saturday trips to the park. Andrew reading bedtime stories with exaggerated voices that made Chris wheeze with laughter. One evening after the twins had gone to bed, Andrew lingered at Julia's kitchen table. A soft playlist hummed in the background. The room smelled like vanilla candles and roasted vegetables. Julia poured 2 glasses of wine, her hair messy and damp from an evening bath. "Do you remember when we used to dream about this?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "I used to picture it so often it felt like torture. And now?" He looked at her, truly looked. Not as the girl he left behind, not as the mother of his sons, but as the woman who had held everything together while he was lost chasing shadows of success. "Now it feels like home." She hesitated, then reached out and took his hand across the table. For the first time in 6 years, their fingers intertwined without hesitation. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. Inside, time softened. Andrew wasn't sure what tomorrow held, or whether the past could ever be fully mended. But he knew that tonight, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. And for the first time, so did she. The golden days of early autumn slowly gave way to the amber light of October. The trees burned with color, the air turned crisp, and the sound of leaves crunching beneath little feet became a daily melody outside Julia's house. The boys settled into school surprisingly well. Their teachers adored them, especially Alex's curiosity and Chris's vivid imagination. And the principal had even commented to Andrew and Julia during a parent meeting, "They're inseparable, like they've always known love." Andrew carried those words with him like a small medal of honor. By now he had learned the exact times Julia liked her coffee, what books she read before bed, and how she tapped her foot when trying not to cry during heartfelt moments. He also learned that Chris had night terrors if he slept with the door closed, and that Alex had to have 3 blueberries in his oatmeal. No more, no less, or breakfast was ruined. The more he stayed, the more he felt the fabric of this life tighten around him. Not as an outsider looking in, but as someone genuinely stitched into its seams. One Thursday evening, Julia invited him to a small-town fundraiser at the elementary school. It was a harvest-themed event: pumpkin painting, caramel apples, raffles for baskets wrapped in cellophane and tied with orange ribbon. Andrew arrived wearing a simple flannel shirt and jeans, feeling oddly nervous. He wasn't there as a CEO or public figure. He was just a father, a man trying to rebuild what he had once unknowingly abandoned. As they walked the school's decorated hallways, parents smiled at Julia and Andrew with curiosity, some with familiarity. There were whispers, of course. His face was recognizable, especially after a local reporter had published a quiet piece titled, "Billionaire CEO Chooses Family Over Fortune." He didn't mind. If anything, he was proud of the shift. Chris pulled him toward the craft table, insisting he carve a pumpkin that looked like a rocket ship, while Alex dragged Julia to the cookie decorating station. The night was filled with laughter and sticky fingers, and at one point Andrew looked across the gymnasium and caught Julia's gaze. She smiled at him, not with nostalgia or sadness, but with something warm, present, hopeful. After the boys fell asleep in the backseat of Julia's car, the 2 adults sat out front for a while, the dashboard casting a soft glow across their faces. "I never expected to see you again," Julia said, staring out the windshield. "I didn't expect to find you," Andrew answered, "but I think I've been searching for you longer than I realized." She looked at him, expression unreadable. "And what now? You found us. What do you want?" He thought for a moment, not carefully. "Honestly, I want to be their dad. I want to be with you, not because I feel guilty or because it's the right thing, but because I love this. All of it. Even the mess. Even the exhaustion." Julia turned her gaze back to the front of the car. "It's still hard for me," she whispered, "to trust it, to trust you." "I'll wait," Andrew said quietly. "I'll keep showing up until you don't need to question it anymore." The following weekend, Andrew surprised the boys by taking them on a small trip to a nearby nature reserve. It was nothing extravagant, just a cabin with no Wi-Fi, a lake, and trees for miles. Julia came, hesitant at first, but soon found herself laughing as the boys tried to skip stones, and Andrew fell into the lake while trying to impress them. They cooked s'mores on a small fire pit and told ghost stories with flashlights under blankets. That night, while the boys were asleep, Andrew and Julia sat on the porch under a thick blanket of stars. "You were always chasing the future," she said, leaning against the wooden rail. He looked up. "And it brought me back to my past, to the one part I never should have left behind." Julia was quiet. Then she said something he hadn't expected. "I still love you. I don't know what that means yet, but I do. Andrew reached for her hand, held it with reverence. That means everything to me. She let herself lean into him. For the first time, fully. The next morning, the boys woke them up with messy hair and giggles, demanding pancakes and threatening to jump on the bed if they didn't get them. Julia laughed. Andrew groaned. But beneath the noise, something sacred had taken root. Not perfection, not fairy tale simplicity, but something real. A life not built overnight, but brick by brick, laugh by laugh, forgiveness by forgiveness. A life worth staying for. The first snow arrived earlier than expected that year, blanketing the small town in a soft hush. It came overnight, silent and undisturbed, turning the trees into lacework and rooftops into powdered sugar. Andrew opened the curtains of his rented house that morning to find the world transformed. Clean, peaceful, brand new. He stood there for a while, holding a mug of coffee and watching the flakes swirl under the pale sunrise. He thought of the boys' excitement, of Julia's smile, of how life had settled into something beautifully ordinary, yet extraordinary in its meaning. It had been nearly 3 months since that day at the bus stop. 3 months since his life turned a corner, since he found Julia and the twins. In that short span of time, everything had changed, not just logistically, but emotionally. He was no longer waking up with the weight of isolation on his chest. Now he woke with purpose, with warmth. The boys now called him Dad without hesitation, shouting it across schoolyards and dinner tables with delight. They had fully claimed him, and he them. He had memorized the songs they liked before bed, the games they played on rainy days, the exact way their hair curled after bath time. It wasn't just bonding, it was knowing. A deep, cellular recognition that this was who he was meant to be. And with Julia, things had blossomed into something fragile, gentle, but rooted in something deeper than romance. Shared history, forgiveness, trust rebuilt from ash. That morning, he bundled up and walked over to their house. The boys were already outside, stomping through the snow in oversized boots and mismatched gloves. Chris was making a snow angel, while Alex attempted to build what he called a snow robot. Julia stood on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, her cheeks pink from the cold. Andrew couldn't help but pause for a moment, just to look at her. This version of her was stronger, wiser, even more beautiful than the one he had left behind years ago. "I brought breakfast," he called out, holding up a paper bag. She smiled, walking toward him. "Only if it's from the bakery with the cinnamon rolls." "Of course," Mihan said. "You think I'd forget your favorite?" They ate together inside, warm and cozy, while the boys played. The sound of their laughter filled the home like music. Afterward, Andrew offered to take the boys sledding while Julia took a rare, well-earned nap. At the hill near the town's edge, the twins were fearless. Andrew ran beside them, pulled the sled back up again and again, laughed when he fell face first into the snow. At one point, as they all collapsed onto the hill, breathless and rosy-cheeked, Chris turned to him and said, "This is the best day ever." Alex chimed in, "We should do this every weekend. Forever." Andrew ruffled both their heads, eyes misty despite the cold. "That's the plan, guys. That's the plan." That evening, they all gathered by the fireplace. Julia lit candles on the mantel, and the twins wrapped themselves in blankets as Andrew read to them from their favorite picture book. As they dozed off, their heads resting on either side of him, Julia came and sat across from him, watching the flames dance in the hearth. She held out a small box. "What's this?" he asked. "Open it," she said softly. Inside was a single silver key on a worn leather string. "To the house," she said. "Not because I need you to help, but because I want you to feel like this is your home too." Andrew stared at the key, stunned. It felt heavier than gold, not in weight, but in meaning. "I don't need a mansion," he said. "I just need this. You, them, all of this." Julia leaned forward and kissed him, slow and certain. It wasn't fireworks or music swelling in the background. It was better than that. It was real. The months that followed were full of small moments that added up to a life. School projects, scraped knees, holiday decorations, quiet dinners. Eventually, Andrew sold his penthouse apartment in Manhattan. He stepped down as CEO and stayed on only as chairman, choosing to invest more in playgrounds than portfolios. He started a foundation for single parents and lost children because he now knew what it meant to lose years that couldn't be retrieved. One spring afternoon, as the snow melted and the crocuses peeked through the thawed soil, the family walked hand in hand through the park where it had all begun. The twins were chasing each other through the trees, and Julia leaned into Andrew's shoulder. "You're not the man I met all those years ago," she said. "No," he agreed. "That man didn't know what mattered. And now?" He looked at the boys, then at her. "Now I do." The story didn't end there. Because real stories don't end when the credits roll. They keep going, in scraped knees and birthday candles, in bedtime kisses and early morning chaos, in second chances, especially the ones we never saw coming. This story's ending is deeply satisfying because it offers something rare in emotional narratives: earned hope. It doesn't rely on flashy drama or unrealistic twists, but instead builds on quiet, powerful revelations. Love rediscovered, fatherhood embraced, and a life rebuilt not with wealth, but with presence, humility, and intention. What makes the conclusion truly resonate is how the characters grow through the weight of their choices. Andrew doesn't rescue anyone with money. He repairs what was broken with consistency, care, and time. Julia doesn't simply forgive. She reclaims her own voice and values. And the boys, once strangers to their own father, find home in his arms. The final scenes don't wrap the story in a perfect bow, and that's what makes them real. Life continues with scraped knees, sleepy school mornings, and laughter echoing in parks. That's the quiet miracle of it all. This is a story that reminds us that some goodbyes aren't forever, and sometimes the family we lost is still waiting for us to come home.